There are moments in history when a single, quiet event lights a fire destined to burn through the veils of illusion. It does not roar through the headlines or dominate public squares, but instead hums softly beneath the surface, awakening those who listen, those who feel the stir of something ancient calling from within. In 1945, in the sun-scorched desert of Nag Hammadi, Egypt, such a fire was ignited. A farmer, wielding a pickaxe not for knowledge but for fertilizer, shattered a jar buried for over 1,000 years. Within it, papyrus codices wrapped in leather, dusty but intact. The air around them, still dry with the breath of centuries. What he held was not treasure and gold, but something far rarer, a collection of forgotten scriptures, secret teachings buried deliberately and in silence, meant not for the powerful, but for the seeker. These texts, now known as the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, would shatter what we thought we knew about Christianity, divinity, and the very nature of the universe. They revealed the voice of a tradition long suppressed, Gnosticism, a mystic path of inner knowledge, radical self-awareness, and a spiritual cosmology that dared to call the world an illusion and divinity, something we must remember, not worship. But why were these writings hidden? Why were they banned? What do they threaten? The answer is simple, and yet infinitely deep. They offered a path that placed power not in temples or thrones, but in the silent chambers of the human soul. Gnosticism speaks directly to the seeker, the wanderer, the one who feels, even without evidence, that the world is not what it seems, that reality, as we're told, is incomplete, that something is missing. This is not a doctrine. It is not a religion in the traditional sense. It is a fire, and it is dangerous because it frees. Imagine a universe where the God who created the world is not the highest, but a blind architect, the demiurge, ignorant of the fullness of the true divine source, the pleroma. Imagine that within you exists a fragment of that fullness, a divine spark, a sliver of eternal light longing to return home. Imagine that your suffering, your alienation, your insatiable desire for meaning are not signs of failure, but of memory. You are not broken. You are trapped. These ideas are not new. They are not modern. They are as old as language itself, whispered through the cracks of official history, encoded in parables and myths, and hidden in plain sight. They have waited not just to be read, but to be remembered. In your hands or in your ears, you now hold a thread woven through millennia. Not merely a retelling of what was found in Nag Hammadi, but an invitation, a journey, a mirror. This audiobook will not just inform you. It will ask things of you. It will challenge you. It will speak to that part of you that suspects, quietly, stubbornly, that you are more than flesh and thought, that your life is not a mistake but a mission. You will meet forgotten texts and silenced prophets. You will walk through strange cosmologies where wisdom falls and light hides itself in matter. You will encounter a version of Jesus unlike any in churches, a teacher of secret truths, a guide to the kingdom within. You will explore ancient mythologies and their modern echoes, from Plato to Jung, from the Gospel of Thomas to the Matrix. And more than anything, you'll be asked, are you ready to awaken? Because Gnosis, the true knowledge, is not about belief. It is not about answers. It is about remembering. The flame has never gone out. It was buried, not in the sands of Egypt, but in the very core of who you are. You've been asleep for so long, and the world has offered you dream after dream to keep you still. But now something inside you stirs. This is your call to remember. Let the journey begin. Chapter 1, The Unearthed Mystery, the rediscovery of Nag Hammadi. It was an ordinary day in the unyielding heat of Upper Egypt. The sun hung mercilessly over the rugged hills near the town of Nag Hammadi, casting sharp shadows over the land. A local farmer named Muhammad al-Salman, accompanied by his brother, set out to dig for a resource more valuable than he realized: sabal, a soft, nitrogen-rich soil used as fertilizer. What he unearthed, however, would not nourish crops but feed the soul of history. Beneath layers of dirt and time, they struck something unexpected: a large sealed jar made of red clay. The men hesitated. Was it cursed? Filled with jinn or spirits? Or maybe it contained gold? Temptation won, and the jar was broken open. What spilled out was no treasure in the conventional sense. 13 leather-bound codices, wrapped in linen, tumbled into the light of the 20th century. Dusty, fragile, and yet miraculously preserved, they carried the voices of a forgotten age. The year was 1945, but the contents of those jars dated back to the 3rd and 4th century CE. What emerged was a library of lost wisdom, buried just as Christianity was becoming the imperial religion of Rome. As orthodoxy took hold, dissenting voices, like those of the Gnostics, were systematically silenced. And so, these texts were hidden, perhaps by monks or spiritual communities, preserved not by accident, but by purpose. It was not long before the codices fell into the hands of antiquities dealers and black market traders. For a time, they drifted through obscurity, some pages lost or mishandled. But eventually, scholars would realize the magnitude of what had been found. The texts were written in Coptic, an ancient Egyptian language derived from Greek, and they bore strange, provocative titles: the Gospel of Thomas, the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Philip, the Thunder, Perfect Mind. These were not just variants of biblical stories. They were radically different interpretations of divinity, reality, and the human condition. Imagine the implications. Hidden in a jar for over a millennium were alternative gospels, many of them portraying Jesus not as a crucified redeemer, but as a mystical teacher, one who offered secret knowledge, not sacrificial salvation. These writings did not describe a world created by a loving, omnipotent God, but by a flawed and ignorant being, a false creator known as the Demiurge. This was a spiritual rebellion dressed in Scripture, dangerous, beautiful, and subversive. The discovery sent shockwaves through the theological and academic world. It was as if history had whispered, "There is more to the story." And so, the study of the Nag Hammadi library began, a painstaking process of translation, restoration, and interpretation. What emerged from that effort was a new vision of early Christianity, not as a single tree with firm roots, but as a forest of competing voices, some of which were nearly lost to silence. The timing of the discovery was, in many ways, perfect. The mid-20th century was a period of spiritual upheaval and philosophical restlessness. World War II had just ended. The atomic bomb had changed the very definition of power. Existentialism gripped Europe. Psychology began mapping the soul like never before. Into this context stepped a group of ancient texts that declared, "The world is an illusion. You are not who you think you are. The truth lies within." It is no coincidence that thinkers such as Carl Jung became deeply fascinated with these manuscripts. Jung saw in the Gnostics a mirror of the modern psyche, fragmented, repressed, but yearning for wholeness. In fact, Jung's own private work, 7 Sermons to the Dead, written decades before the Nag Hammadi discovery, reads like a Gnostic revelation. When the codices emerged, Jung's interest only deepened, and he would later receive a facsimile of the Gospel of Truth, one of the Nag Hammadi texts. But beyond scholars and psychoanalysts, the spiritual seeker began to listen. Something in these writings resonated. Their strangeness was not repellent. It was intimate, like a forgotten dream being remembered. The Gnostics spoke of awakening, of a hidden light within, of truth concealed by appearances. They seemed to know something we had only begun to suspect, that the world offered to us is not the world as it is, and that freedom requires knowledge that cannot be taught, only discovered. And yet, for all their revelatory power, the Nag Hammadi manuscripts remained, at first, on the margins. The Church, unsurprisingly, showed little interest. To acknowledge these texts would be to acknowledge that Christianity was never as unified as it claimed, that there were many early interpretations of Jesus, many spiritual paths stemming from the same root, and perhaps more threateningly, that one of those paths insisted you needed no church at all, because that is the essence of Gnosticism, not heresy, but spiritual autonomy. A declaration that God is not out there, but in here, that we are not fallen creatures needing forgiveness, but forgotten beings needing to awaken. The knowledge, gnosis, that would set us free is not a doctrine, but an experience. And it is for that reason, more than any other, that these texts were buried. They threatened systems of control. They offered power to the individual soul. They still do. The academic world, at first, approached the Nag Hammadi texts with a cautious reverence. They were studied like archaeological fossils, remarkable, but supposedly irrelevant to contemporary belief. Yet the more scholars translated, the more they realized these weren't merely theological oddities. They were sophisticated spiritual systems, articulated with poetic intensity and philosophical depth, rivaling the great traditions of East and West. One of the most arresting features of these writings was their stunning independence of thought. These were not texts concerned with rules, rituals, or moralistic commandments. Instead, they spoke of a deep rupture, a split between the true spiritual world and the material illusion that had imprisoned it. They proposed a worldview where the central spiritual task was not obedience, but remembrance, not sin and redemption, but ignorance and awakening. And at the heart of this rupture was a singular question, perhaps the most unsettling one a spiritual tradition could ask. What if the God who made the world is not the true God at all? This was the Gnostic heresy, the spark that had once inspired early mystics and terrified institutional leaders. The Gnostics claimed that the creator of the material world, the God of Genesis, the lawgiver, the punisher, was not the highest divine being, but a derivative, ignorant power. This being, called the demiurge, believed himself supreme, but was in fact a blind architect, a tyrant who mistook matter for truth. According to the Gnostics, the true God, the source, the one, existed beyond this flawed creation, in a realm of perfect light called the pleroma. And we, the human beings, were not merely flesh and bone, not creatures molded from clay, but carriers of a divine spark, exiled fragments of a forgotten unity. This was not mythology for its own sake. It was a diagnosis of the human condition, the anguish we feel in modern life, the sense that we are strangers in this world, that nothing quite fits, that even our deepest joys are shadowed by impermanence. These were not failures of psychology, said the Gnostics. They were evidence of a truth more ancient than religion itself. We are trapped, and the world we see is not the world that is. The radical implications of this cosmology cannot be overstated. It undermined the authority of priests, temples, and sacred texts. It dismissed the idea of salvation through obedience or ritual. It did not demand faith in someone else's revelation, but offered the possibility of one's own. And it resonated, Even as the academic world struggled to categorize the Nag Hammadi texts, spiritual seekers, mystics, poets, and psychologists found themselves drawn to them. In the post-war years, through the 60s, 70s, and into the modern age, a quiet Gnostic revival began to take root. It wasn't about rebuilding an ancient religion, but about rediscovering a way of seeing. In an age defined by existential doubt, the Gnostic path offered clarity, not through dogma, but through direct inner experience. It aligned with the growing interest in meditation, consciousness, and altered states. It spoke to those disillusioned by authority, by institutional corruption, by the empty promises of consumer society. It said, "You're not crazy for feeling out of place. You are divine, misplaced in a world that does not know who you are." Perhaps most astonishing was how contemporary culture, often unconsciously, began to echo these ancient truths. Films, especially in the science fiction genre, began portraying illusory worlds hiding a deeper truth. The Matrix, The Truman Show, Dark City, all carried the unmistakable imprint of Gnostic thought. The idea that reality is a construct, that freedom comes not from escape, but from awakening, that we are all prisoners until we remember ourselves. These were no longer esoteric concepts. They had become cultural archetypes. And so the dusty papyrus codices of Nag Hammadi, once buried in clay jars under the Egyptian sun, have begun to speak again, not just to scholars or historians, but to the restless heart of modern humanity. But what exactly is this Gnosticism? What were the beliefs of those who wrote these texts, those who risked their lives to preserve them? To answer that, we must now step deeper into the cave, past the broken jar and into the library of the soul. We must learn what the Gnostics taught about the world, the divine, and the secret knowledge that frees the spirit from illusion. Let us begin where they began, with a question, not a doctrine. What if the world is not what it seems? Chapter 2, What is Gnosticism? The Forbidden Religion. To ask what Gnosticism is to step into a labyrinth rather than open a dictionary. Unlike formal religions with defined doctrines, central authorities, and structured rituals, Gnosticism is not a single, unified system of belief. It is better understood as a stream of mystical consciousness, a current that flowed alongside early Christianity and Judaism, at times overlapping, often diverging. It was not a rival religion. It was a radically different approach to existence. Gnosticism derives its name from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge, but not knowledge in the intellectual or academic sense. It is not the type of knowledge one reads in books or acquires through teachers. Gnosis is inner revelation, direct spiritual awakening. It is the moment when the veil lifts and you remember who you really are and what this world really is. To the Gnostics, the problem with humanity was not sin, as the church taught. It was ignorance, not just a lack of facts, but a forgetfulness of our divine origin. The soul, once part of the divine fullness, the pleroma, has been trapped in matter, bound by illusions, deceived by external powers. The path of liberation, therefore, is not obedience to external law, but the awakening of the soul to its true identity. This may sound familiar to students of Eastern philosophy. There are profound parallels between Gnosticism and traditions such as Vedanta, Buddhism, and Taoism. In all of these, the external world is seen not as ultimate reality, but as illusion or Maya. The true self, hidden beneath layers of perception and ego, must be remembered through direct experience, not belief. Yet while the East spoke of cosmic balance and impersonal forces, Gnosticism introduced something far more daring, a story of cosmic rebellion. At the center of the Gnostic worldview is a tension, a rupture in the very fabric of creation. In the beginning, there was the One, the invisible Father, the source of all light and being. From this source emerged emanations, divine aspects of the eternal, known as eons. Among them was Sophia, or wisdom. Moved by a longing to know the unknowable, she acted without her counterpart, and in doing so gave birth to something imperfect, the demiurge. This being, blind to the fullness from which it came, believed itself to be the only God. It created the material world, a world of forms, limits, death, and suffering. This creator God, often identified with the Old Testament Yahweh, was not evil in the traditional sense. He was ignorant, arrogant, a being who ruled not by love, but by domination, deception, and law. To live in the world he made was to be caught in a web, a world of beauty and terror, joy and grief, yet ultimately a prison for the soul. But the Gnostics were not nihilists. They did not believe that all was lost. Hidden within the human being, they taught, was a spark of the divine, a fragment of the pleroma itself. This spark, if awakened, could return to its origin, like a flame rising back to the sun. And this awakening, this inner resurrection, was the purpose of Gnosticism. So how does one awaken? The path is not external. It does not lie in rites, sacraments, or submission to dogma. The Gnostics rejected many of the early church's central ideas, that salvation comes from Christ's death, that God is a righteous judge, that faith alone is enough. To them, these were mechanisms of control, not liberation. Instead, Gnosticism offered a deeply introspective path, one that emphasized meditation, contemplation, visionary experience, and symbolic understanding. Their scriptures were often dense, poetic, filled with metaphors, paradoxes, and riddles. Not because they were unclear, but because truth cannot be handed down like a recipe. It must emerge from within. The great mystery was not in the heavens. It was within the human being. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. The Gospel of Thomas. These are not the words of a passive follower. These are the words of a soul ready to rise. In this light, Jesus himself becomes not a sacrifice but a guide, a revealer of Gnosis. In the Gnostic Gospels, he does not die for our sins. He teaches us how to awaken. He is the one who remembers and seeks to help others do the same. His kingdom is not of this world, because this world is not real in the ultimate sense. The true kingdom, he says, is within you and all around you, but you do not see it. Such ideas were revolutionary. They still are. And it is precisely because of their revolutionary power that Gnosticism was declared heresy, its writings burned, its followers persecuted. The Roman Church, consolidating power, could not tolerate a tradition that made each individual a bearer of divine truth. The stakes were not merely theological. They were political, cultural, existential. But suppression did not destroy the fire. It merely buried it. And so, for centuries, the Gnostic path survived underground, in fragments, in symbols, in whispers, until 1945, when the earth itself offered back its secrets. The question now is not what the Gnostics believed. The question is, what do you believe? If the world is a prison, will you stay asleep in its comfort, or will you search for the door? If your soul is divine, will you let it be ruled by ignorance, or will you begin to return? The Gnostics did not ask for followers. They asked for seekers. And the first step in seeking is remembering. To understand why Gnosticism was so dangerous and remains so, we must understand what it challenged. Where traditional religion sought conformity, Gnosticism called for individual inner transformation. Where institutions offered certainty, the Gnostics offered mystery. Where dogma said, "Believe, and you shall be saved," the Gnostic path whispered, "Know yourself, and you shall be free." This was more than theology. It was a radical reclamation of authority. The Gnostic did not look outward to priests or prophets for salvation, but inward, toward the quiet voice within, the hidden flame that speaks not in commandments, but in symbols, in visions, in dreams. As such, the Gnostics were not only spiritual rebels, they were psychological pioneers. Long before modern psychology would chart the inner world, Gnosticism recognized that the human condition is one of amnesia. We have forgotten not just who we are, but what reality is. We are spiritual beings, sparks of the divine, trapped in a cosmos of illusion. But the illusion is not just physical. It is conceptual. It is the roles we play, the identities we cling to, the systems we inherit unquestioningly. It is culture, ego, fear, habit, the web of lies that tells us we are small, sinful, and powerless. The Gnostic path begins when one starts to see through this web, not intellectually, but existentially. It begins with a rupture, a moment when the world, for all its colors and textures, begins to feel false, flat, hollow. It is the quiet horror that arises when one realizes that no amount of achievement, pleasure, or comfort can fill the void. It is the first crack in the facade, but it is also the first light. In this sense, Gnosticism is not a religion for the complacent. It is a fire for those who burn. It does not soothe the soul, it unmasks it. It does not teach peace, it demands truth, even when that truth is terrifying. It is the inward turning that eventually becomes an upward flight. This is why the Gnostic scriptures are often so cryptic. They are not written to convince. They are written to awaken. Their metaphors are keys, their contradictions doors. They require not belief, but encounter. And unlike religions that offer clarity through hierarchy, Gnosticism offers paradox. The soul is divine, but imprisoned. The Creator is powerful, but ignorant. The world is beautiful, but false. Salvation is within, but must be revealed from beyond. These are not contradictions to be solved, but tensions to be lived. For the Gnostic, truth lives in the in-between, not in black and white, but in the subtle shimmer of the unseen. So how does Gnosticism differ from traditional Christianity, practically speaking? The differences are stark. In Christianity, God creates the world and calls it good. In Gnosticism, the material world is a tragic byproduct of a spiritual error. In Christianity, sin is disobedience. In Gnosticism, sin is ignorance. In Christianity, salvation comes through the blood of Christ. In Gnosticism, salvation comes through inner knowledge, gnosis. In Christianity, Jesus is the redeemer of sins. In Gnosticism, Jesus is the revealer of truth, the awakened one who reminds others how to wake up. In Christianity, the church is the body of Christ, necessary for salvation. In Gnosticism, the institutional church is often a distortion, a misrepresentation of the original message. This divergence made the Gnostics a threat, not just to theology, but to the emerging structure of religious power. A path that leads directly inward renders cathedrals obsolete. A gospel that says the kingdom is within you undermines every priesthood. Yet for all its rejection of religious authority, Gnosticism is not anarchic. It does not dismiss sacredness. It reclaims it. It sees the sacred not in dogma, but in direct experience. And in this, it shares kinship with mystical traditions across cultures. The Upanishads of India speak of the Atman, the divine self, as one with Brahman, the source of all. The Buddha taught that liberation comes not from faith, but from awakening beyond illusion. The Taoist sages found truth not in doctrine, but in alignment with the mysterious flow of the Tao. The Hermetic texts, cousins of the Gnostic writings, echo the same call to inner alchemy. As within, so without. These are not superficial similarities. They are deep resonances, suggesting that Gnosticism is not a historical anomaly, but a universal archetype, the perennial path of awakening hidden within every culture, resurfacing whenever systems become too rigid, too externalized, too divorced from the living truth. In a modern world where disillusionment with traditional institutions has grown, Gnosticism speaks again. It does so not through sects or churches, but through spiritual seekers, psychological explorers, philosophical rebels, and even artists. Carl Jung, perhaps the most Gnostic of modern thinkers, saw the unconscious not as a place of pathology, but of divine mystery. He recognized that the individuation process, the integration of the fragmented self, is not unlike the Gnostic return to the pleroma. The archetypes of Sophia, the demiurge, the divine child, they live within us, encoded in the psyche, awaiting realization. And through literature, cinema, music, and personal transformation, the Gnostic myth continues to whisper through culture, asking the same forbidden questions. What if reality is not what it seems? What if your true nature is divine? What if everything you've been taught is part of the illusion? These are not questions for the faint of heart, but they're the questions that matter most. To walk the Gnostic path is not to abandon the world, but to see through it. Not to escape suffering, but to understand its source. Not to seek gods in the sky, but to find the divine in the mirror. And so, the forbidden religion survives, not in temples, but in consciousness itself. In the whisper that stirs when all else grows silent. In the ache that cannot be named. In the question that refuses to die. Gnosis is not something you believe in. It is something you remember. Chapter 3, The Gnostic Cosmogony, a world created by mistake. In the beginning, there was no darkness, no time, no matter. There was only the One, a presence beyond form, beyond thought, beyond name. This One, known to the Gnostics as the invisible spirit or the true source, was utterly transcendent. Not a god in the traditional sense, but the fullness of all being, the pleroma. From this ineffable origin radiated emanations, pure aspects of the divine mind. These were not beings in the mythological sense, but eons, metaphysical principles, personified forms of divine consciousness. They existed in perfect harmony, reflecting the wholeness of the source. Each aeon mirrored an aspect of the divine: love, wisdom, truth, silence, thought, grace, all of them eternal, indivisible, unified. Among these emanations was one called Sophia, the aeon of wisdom. She was luminous, radiant, powerful, but unlike the others, Sophia acted alone, moved by a desire to know the unknowable, to create without the wholeness of her counterpart. She transgressed the boundaries of divine harmony. In her solitude, she reached into the depths of the divine mystery without permission, without the balancing presence of the One. And in doing so, she birthed a mistake. That mistake was Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, a malformed entity, ignorant of his origin. Yaldabaoth was cast out of the pleroma like a spark falling into the void. Alone in a realm devoid of light, he mistook his solitude for supremacy. Not knowing the source, not seeing the other eons, he believed himself to be God. And in his arrogance, he fashioned the material universe, not from light or balance, but from ignorance and imbalance. He crafted the heavens and the earth, the stars and the spheres, unaware that all he made was a shadow of something greater. And as he built, he declared, just as in Genesis, "I am God, and there is no other beside me." But the Gnostics knew better. This was not the voice of the true divine. This was the voice of delusion, of a being trapped in his own illusion of power. To rule over his creation, Yaldabaoth fashioned archons, lesser rulers, enforcers of order, architects of illusion. They shaped the bodies of human beings out of earth and water, wind and flame, but they could not give them life. They could not spark consciousness. Only when Sophia, in a gesture of redemption, secretly infused her light into the human form did the first man awaken. This light was the divine spark, a fragment of the pleroma itself, placed like a seed within the prison of flesh. Thus began the great Gnostic myth: spirit trapped in matter, light imprisoned in darkness. To the outside world, it looked like the beginning of life. To the Gnostic, it was the beginning of exile. This radical cosmology turned the traditional understanding of creation upside down. Whereas Judeo-Christian texts proclaimed, "And God saw that it was good," the Gnostics whispered, "It was a lie." The world, beautiful as it may seem, was not born of divine intention, but of spiritual confusion. It was a simulacrum of creation, a divine error passed off as perfection. But not all hope was lost. Hidden within every human being, no matter how lost or asleep, is the memory of the source, the gnosis. The Gnostic journey, then, is not to perfect the world, but to see through it, not to master the illusion, but to wake from it. The demiurge, though powerful, is not omnipotent. His kingdom is one of forms, not essence. He governs the flesh, not the spirit. He rules over laws, not over truth. His greatest weapon is ignorance, and his greatest fear is that you might remember, because to remember is to return. This myth was not a rejection of reality. It was a reframing. The Gnostics saw the suffering of the world not as divine punishment, but as the trauma of separation. Every sorrow, every longing, every hunger for something more was a sign of the soul's homesickness, a call to the forgotten fullness. The cosmos, in this view, is not a gift to be accepted, but a puzzle to be solved. It is not sacred in itself, but a veil behind which the sacred hides. The stars, the mountains, even the body, these are echoes, distortions, fragments of a world we once knew and must remember again. And Sophia, the fallen wisdom, is not cast away in shame. She becomes the Redeemer, the divine presence that guides the soul back to the light. Her fall was tragic, but her act of embedding the spark within humanity was redemptive. She suffers with us, within us, urging us to awaken and ascend. This is the cosmology not of comfort, but of confrontation. It asks us to challenge everything we think is real, to question the very structure of the universe, and to dare believe that the truth lies not in the world we see, but in the world we've forgotten. To the unawakened soul, the material world appears complete. It is full of color, structure, sensation, and loss. It offers the illusion of purpose through careers, families, beliefs, and systems. But the Gnostics taught that beneath this seamless surface lies a deeper fracture. The cosmos, they insisted, is not whole. It is a simulacrum, a mirror world designed not to reflect divine order, but to conceal it. And its architects, the archons, are not evil in the cartoonish sense, but agents of entropy. These are cosmic gatekeepers, entities who maintain the illusions of material reality. Their tools are fear, distraction, and desire. They ensure that the soul remains asleep, entangled in the sensory web, convinced that this life, this body, this world is all there is. The archons govern systems, not only planetary spheres, but ideological ones. They are embodied in institutions that demand obedience, in political orders that crush dissent, in spiritual authorities that preach submission rather than truth. In modern terms, they are present in media machines that numb, technologies that isolate, dogmas that condition, and cultures that commodify the soul. But most dangerously, they operate within us. The Gnostics understood this, that the outer prison is built from the bricks of the inner one. The archons may shape society, but they feed on internal conditions: fear, shame, guilt, blind faith. They thrive on our identification with the body, with roles, with ego. They do not need chains. They require only that we forget. And forgetting is easy in the world of forms. The human soul, however, carries a secret. Hidden within its depths is the divine spark, the forgotten fragment of the pleroma. It cannot be extinguished. It cannot be corrupted, but can be buried and, most tragically, ignored. The Gnostics believed that the journey of the soul was one of descent and return. Like Sophia, who fell from the pleroma and reached into the void, each soul descends into embodiment, into form, forgetfulness, and fragmentation. But the story does not end there. The soul is not lost. It is veiled, and in that veiling lies the mystery of awakening. To awaken is not to acquire something new. It is to remember something ancient. It is the slow, burning realization that the world around you is only half the story. It is the moment when your pain ceases to be a symptom of failure and becomes evidence of truth. When your longing is no longer a curse, but a compass. The soul's true nature, they taught, is light. Not metaphorical light, but a form of existence prior to matter, a frequency of divine being that was never meant to be confined. The spark within us yearns not for earthly pleasure, but for reunion with its source. But how does the soul begin this return? For the Gnostics, the return begins not in ritual, but in awareness. Gnosis is not salvation through belief. It is salvation through insight, through the direct perception of the falseness of the world and the truth of the self. It is seeing through the archons, through the demiurge, through the facades of religious and political power. This awakening is often described as painful. It is the shattering of illusion, the death of identity, the loss of certainty. But it is also liberation. For when the soul recognizes that it has been tricked, that it has been asleep in a world of dreams, it begins to remember itself. And in that remembrance lies freedom. Blessed are the solitary and elect, for you will find the kingdom. For you are from it, and to it you will return. Gospel of Thomas. These are not abstract words. They are a code of return, spoken across centuries to those who feel the falseness but do not yet have the language to name it. The Gnostic scriptures were written not to convince the world, but to reach the 1 in 10,000 who could feel the crack in the veil and dare to follow it. Sophia, the wounded wisdom, is not banished from this story. She becomes its heart. In Gnostic tradition, she is the one who cries out from the depths of matter, urging the soul toward awakening. She is the Shekinah, the hidden presence, the voice of intuition, the flicker of inner truth that refuses to be silenced. She is also the model of redemption, one who fell but rose again, not by overpowering, but by transforming, not by escaping matter, but by illuminating it. Her story is our story. The Gnostic myth of creation, far from being a denial of life, is a redefinition of its purpose. We are not here to serve a God of law and punishment. We are not here to build perfect societies or accumulate blessings. We are here to wake up, to pierce the veil, and to return home. The world, in this view, is not evil, but it is a trap. Not hopeless, but deceptive. Not meaningless, but misdirected. To see through it is not to despair, it is to begin. And so the Gnostic vision stands not as an alternative cosmology, but as a spiritual psychology, a myth that maps the architecture of the human condition. It tells us that our longing is not madness, that our exile is not accidental, that our pain is not punishment, but proof that we were made for something more. The mistake of creation is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the return. Chapter 4. Sophia, the goddess who fell to save us. Long before the world was formed, before matter was shaped or light fractured into shadow, there was Sophia, the aeon of divine wisdom. In the high celestial realms of the Pleroma, she existed not as myth, but as an emanation of the One, the infinite source of all being. She was not created. She unfolded, a ripple of consciousness, the living mind of the divine made manifest. Yet Sophia was different from the other Aeons. She was not merely reflective, but curious. She desired to know, to act, to create, not from rebellion, but from longing. Longing to touch the unknowable mystery at the heart of the source. And in that longing, she stepped beyond her station. She created alone, without her divine consort. And so began the fall. What Sophia birthed was not light, but limitation. A malformed being, a distorted echo of the divine. Yaldabaoth, the demiurge. Not evil by intent, but deformed by separation. He emerged into a lower realm, outside the Pleroma, unaware of his origin, unaware of the wholeness that once surrounded him. His ignorance became his identity. Believing himself to be the only power, he created the material world. He populated it with stars and spheres, laws and rulers, and finally, with human forms, clay bodies, lifeless and inert. Sophia watched, grieved, and yet compassionate. She had not intended to create a tyrant. She had not imagined a world so heavy, so blind. And so, to undo her mistake, she acted again, not in arrogance, but in hope. She breathed her light into the human soul. That breath, that spark, is the divine fire that still burns within each of us. To the Gnostics, Sophia is more than myth. She is the soul of the world. She is divine wisdom wounded, divinity exiled, compassion weeping in the dark. Her fall is not a tale of punishment, but a cosmic echo of every human struggle. The moment we act from loneliness, from desire, from a longing to know or to love, and we find ourselves lost. But Sophia does not abandon the world she helped create. She becomes its secret savior. Hidden in matter, she whispers through intuition, through dreams, through the aching hunger for truth. She is the mother of the soul and the midwife of its rebirth. She waits, not as judge, but as guide. In some texts, Sophia descends into the lowest depths of matter, searching for the sparks of divine light scattered by her creation. She wanders through the spheres, past the archons, wrapped in silence, suffering, endurance, and faith. She does not reclaim her divinity through power, but through remembrance, through love. This myth is not abstract. It is personal. Every seeker walks the path of Sophia. Every soul that has longed for something it could not name. Every person who has fallen, broken, despaired, yet still carried the hidden urge to rise again. They are walking her journey. She represents a feminine archetype rarely seen in Western theology, not passive virgin or wrathful queen, but wounded wisdom. Creative, curious, courageous. Her power lies not in domination, but in resilience. Not in judgment, but in restoration. She is the lost voice in patriarchal theology, the suppressed dimension of divine being that seeks not to rule, but to reconcile. In Gnostic myth, she is often paired with Christ, not as his subordinate, but as his counterpart. Where he descends from the pleroma to awaken the soul, she rises from the depths to guide it home. Christ and Sophia together form a bridge. He from above, she from below. The logos and the wisdom, the call and the response. Together, they reflect the truth that redemption is not a one-way act, but a cosmic dance of descent and ascent, of awakening and remembering, of giving and receiving. And yet, Sophia's story is also a warning. Her fall, born of creative longing, became the blueprint for every soul's descent into illusion. Like her, we are creators, capable of forming realities, of building inner worlds. But without balance, without connection to the divine center, we can create prisons as easily as we create beauty. We can become like the demiurge, believing ourselves sovereign while lost in ignorance. Thus, Sophia's myth is not merely about the beginning of time. It is about the present moment in each of us. The world we live in bears the marks of both her light and her fall. Its structures carry the logic of the demiurge, rigid, legalistic, oppressive. But its moments of wonder, of love, of sudden clarity, these are her fingerprints. The taste of the pleroma hidden in the shell of the material. In every sacred tradition, wisdom has a face. Often, it is feminine, not just as a metaphor, but as a force. Sophia, in the Gnostic tradition, is the most luminous embodiment of this sacred feminine intelligence, a power that creates, falls, suffers, and ultimately redeems. She is not a goddess of conquest, nor a detached deity watching from celestial heights. Sophia is the one who enters the brokenness, who chooses to be near, who embodies compassion not as sentiment, but as sacrifice. Her myth speaks to something timeless and universal, that wisdom is not sterile intellect. It is womb-like, creative, and vulnerable. It seeks union. And when that longing is unbalanced, when wisdom tries to act alone to bypass communion, it can fall into shadow. Yet this fall is not her end. It is her transformation. In many mystical traditions, we find echoes of Sophia's journey. In Judaism, we meet Chakma, divine wisdom, the breath through which the world was made. In Kabbalah, the feminine Shekinah is the indwelling presence of God in the world. Exiled, suffering with the people, yearning for reunion with the divine masculine. In Hinduism, we see Sarasvati, goddess of wisdom, learning, and speech, who flows like a river through the seeker's mind. In Greek thought, Athena is born from the mind of Zeus, embodying both reason and battle wisdom, clear-headed but fiercely protective. In Christian mysticism, particularly in Eastern Orthodox theology, Hagia Sophia is the holy wisdom that underlies the Logos itself, predating the masculine formulation of God in many interpretations. In alchemy, Sophia is the soul of the world, anima mundi, whose imprisonment in matter mirrors the process of the alchemist's inner purification. She is the spirit hidden in base material, waiting to be liberated. These aren't mere parallels. They reflect a universal intuition that wisdom is not only light, but also a path through darkness. It is not distant perfection, but presence within imperfection. It falls with us. It suffers with us. It remembers for us. In Gnostic cosmology, Sophia's redemption is the redemption of the soul. Her rising from the abyss is a symbolic roadmap of inner transformation. The human being, like Sophia, acts from longing. We seek knowledge, love, identity. Often we do so alone, cut off from our higher self, from divine order. And in doing so, we fall. We find ourselves surrounded by illusion, bound by ego, confused by contradictory voices. We become creators of false realities, relationships rooted in fear, ambitions driven by shame, beliefs adopted to please systems that do not serve us. This is not sin in the moralistic sense. It is misalignment. It is Sophia's story retold in human form. But just as she did not remain lost, neither must we. The Gnostic path invites us to follow Sophia not only in her fall, but in her return. Through Gnosis, we begin to see. We reclaim the inner light. We dismantle the architecture of illusion, not with violence, but with vision. We refuse to serve the demiurge, not by rebellion, but by remembering the truth that came before him. And when we awaken, we are not alone. For Sophia was never only a myth. She is the inner voice that asks the right question, the ache in the heart that will not be silenced, the dream that feels more real than waking life, the sudden awareness that this isn't all there is. She is the whisper behind the silence, the guide between worlds, the divine mother of awakening. Her relevance today is perhaps greater than ever. In a world dominated by systems that value power over presence, productivity over wisdom, and noise over silence, Sophia's return is urgent. The exile of the feminine from theology has mirrored the exile of compassion from politics, of tenderness from leadership, of introspection from spirituality. To reclaim Sophia is not only to honor the sacred feminine, it is to restore balance to the human soul, and in doing so, to heal the split that birthed the illusion in the first place. In the final image of some Gnostic texts, Sophia is no longer weeping. She is ascending. Her light rises, and with it, the souls of those who remember. Her fall was never a failure. It was a seed planted in the soil of time, blooming now in the hearts of seekers across the world. She did not fall to be worshipped. She fell to find you. Chapter 5, The Gospel of Thomas, The Kingdom Within. There is no nativity scene in the Gospel of Thomas. No miracles, no crucifixion, no resurrection. There is no narrative, no linear story. And yet, from its very first line, it captures something many of the canonical Gospels only hint at. These are the secret sayings which the living Jesus spoke and which Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down. It begins with a secret, not a doctrine, not a proclamation, but a mystery spoken by the living Jesus, not the dead one. What follows is not a story, but a collection of 114 logia, sayings, fragments, riddles. They are meant to be heard, pondered, wrestled with. They are not explanatory. They are initiatory. They awaken, not by informing, but by disrupting the mind and pointing the seeker inward. In this gospel, Jesus does not die for sins. He awakens souls. He does not demand belief. He invites recognition. And he offers no path to heaven outside of the self. His message is both simple and shattering. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. Saying 70. This is not Christianity as most have known it. This is Gnostic Jesus, a revealer of hidden knowledge, a teacher of radical introspection, a provocateur who dissolves religious boundaries. The Gospel of Thomas was likely composed in the early 2nd century CE, perhaps even earlier. It circulated among early Christian and Gnostic communities, especially in Syria and Egypt, where mystical traditions and apocalyptic hopes intermingled. And yet, despite its possible antiquity, possibly older than the Gospel of John, it was excluded from the New Testament canon. Why? Because this Jesus does not need a church. He does not grant authority to institutions. He speaks directly to the soul. His words are meant not to be mediated through priesthoods, but to be understood within the individual. This gospel is a mirror, not a doctrine. The canonical Gospels depict Jesus speaking in parables to the crowds and revealing mysteries privately to his disciples. Thomas, however, removes the crowd entirely. It is a gospel for the inner circle, for those who seek not comfort, but truth, and are willing to lose everything else to find it. Again and again, the sayings dismantle traditional religious expectations. If your leaders say to you, "Look, the kingdom is in the sky," then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, "It is in the sea," then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside you, and it is outside you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are the children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and you are that poverty. Saying 3. This is the heart of Gnosticism. Salvation not through ritual or redemption, but through inner revelation. To know oneself is to awaken the divine memory. The kingdom of God is not a place to arrive at after death. It is a hidden reality already present but veiled. And the veil is the ego, the persona, the inherited identity. To lift that veil is to discover that you are not what you were told you are. You are not broken, not dirty, not separate from God. You are a fragment of light, lost in a world that insists you are darkness. To know yourself truly is to know you are divine. This is why institutional religion could not accept the Gospel of Thomas. It rendered intermediaries obsolete. No need for bishops, councils, or creeds, just the courage to look within. And yet, this inner journey is not easy. Many of the sayings in Thomas are cryptic, paradoxical, deliberately disorienting. For example, when you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female into a single one, so that the male will not be male and the female will not be female, then you will enter the kingdom. Saying 22. What does this mean? This is alchemical language, symbolic transformation. It speaks of integration, the reunion of opposites, the dissolving of duality, the masculine and feminine, the inner and outer, the heavenly and earthly. When these are reconciled within the seeker, they transcend form and remember the formless origin. The kingdom is entered not by going somewhere, but by becoming something whole. Such sayings point to a spirituality not of morality, but of metaphysical transformation. The soul must become single, unified, centered, and awake. And what is sin? In the Gospel of Thomas, sin is not the breaking of divine law. It is ignorance. It is failing to know one's origin. The greatest danger is not immorality. It is forgetfulness. This aligns with the core Gnostic belief that the soul's problem is not guilt, but amnesia. This Jesus is not here to forgive. It is assumed that nothing needs forgiving. He is here to remind. If the Gospel of Thomas is a mirror, then some of its sayings are like cracks in the glass, jagged, shimmering, disorienting. They reflect more than they reveal, and yet, in their mystery, they carry profound power. Take, for instance, become passers-by. Saying 42, just 2 words, no context, no explanation, but within them, a world unfolds. To become passers-by is to refuse to be trapped, to pass through the world as a witness, not as one who clings or possesses. It echoes the great mystical traditions, the non-attachment of Buddhism, the Vairagya of the Vedas, the desert father's rejection of worldly identity. To be a passerby is to recognize that everything is impermanent, roles, possessions, even beliefs. It is not detachment and apathy, but in freedom. This theme repeats in many sayings. The call to live awake in a sleeping world, to remain aware while others are caught in illusion. Blessed is the lion which the human eats, so that the lion becomes human. And cursed is the human whom the lion eats, and the lion becomes human. Saying 7. What does this mean? This is alchemical paradox. The lion is a symbol of animal nature, of instinct, power, and the unconscious. If the human can consume the lion, that is, integrate and transcend the primal forces within, they're transformed into a fuller human, awake and whole. But if the lion consumes the human, if we are ruled by our lower nature, then we become less than what we are. It is not morality, it is spiritual psychology. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus is less savior than mirror, less redeemer than awakener. He doesn't point to himself. He points to the seeker. Again and again, he says, "The light is within you. The truth is already here. Split a piece of wood. I am there. Lift up the stone, and you'll find me there." Saying 77. This is sacramental pantheism, not in the dogmatic sense, but in the mystical one. The divine is not in a temple or behind a veil. The divine is in matter, in form, in simplicity, hidden because it is too obvious. The sacred is everywhere and so easily overlooked. This Jesus cannot be captured in stained glass. He is fluid, elusive, intimate. He demands no worship. He offers no punishment. He invites only one thing, recognition. And here lies the heart of the Gospel of Thomas and of Gnosticism itself. The kingdom of God is not coming. It is here. It is hidden only by your perception. The kingdom is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it. Saying 113. This is a radical redefinition of salvation. No apocalypse is coming to cleanse the world. No Messiah will return to judge the living and the dead. No ritual will purify the soul. The only apocalypse that matters is the unveiling of perception. Gnosis is apocalypse, the ending of illusion. And for those who dare to see, the kingdom is not tomorrow, it is now. Compared to the Jesus of the canonical Gospels, this figure is almost unrecognizable. Gone are the miracles meant to prove divine authority. Gone are the sermons centered on law, repentance, or righteousness. Gone is the crucified Savior whose blood atones for a fallen world. Instead, we meet a Jesus who is wholly present and wholly human, yet blazing with divine memory. He does not die for sins. He dies because truth cannot survive in a world built on lies. And even then, the resurrection is not the point. The point is this: you are what I am. If you know yourselves, you will know me. Sayings 3 and 108. The implications are enormous. If this Jesus is right, then every human soul is capable of awakening. There is no need to wait, no need to beg. The divine is not elsewhere. It is within, imprisoned, yes, but not absent. And the Gospel of Thomas becomes a tool, not a theology. A map, not a law. A code, not a creed. It is not for the crowd. It is for the one who hears the call inside the silence. In our modern world, saturated with noise, confusion, consumerism, and commodified religion, the Gospel of Thomas speaks louder than ever. It calls to those who do not fit, who feel the world's falseness pressing in, who intuit another reality just behind the curtain of perception. It's Jesus is not here to make you comfortable. He is here to wake you up. He is not asking for allegiance. He is offering a mirror. And so, the gospel ends not with a benediction, but with a final challenge. Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. Saying 1, not because they will live forever in body, but because they will have awakened from the illusion of separation. Because they will have remembered the eternal self, the spark that no death can touch. This is the kingdom within. This is the gnosis beyond belief. Chapter 6, the Demiurge and the Archons, Lords of the Illusion. To understand Gnostic cosmology, one must abandon the comforting idea that the universe is fundamentally benevolent or even neutral. For the Gnostic, the cosmos is a trap, not a temple. Its laws are not the fingerprints of divine harmony, but the bars of a metaphysical prison. At the heart of this prison sits a being clothed in thunder, cloaked in command. His name is Yaldabaoth, though he goes by many names: Samel, blind god; Sakla's fool; Ialdabaoth, or most famously, the Demiurge. He is the architect of the material world. But unlike the benevolent creator of Genesis, this god is a pretender. He did not create from wholeness, but from ignorance, cut off from the divine pleroma, mistaking himself for the one. I am God, and there is no other beside me. Yaldabaoth, echoing Isaiah 45 verse 5 in the Gnostic reinterpretation. To the Gnostic ear, this is not the proud declaration of the true God. It is the boast of the blind, a ruler of shadows mistaking his prison for a palace. The Demiurge creates not in unity, but in division. His world is built on binaries: light and dark, male and female, law and transgression, saved and damned. These divisions are the tools of control. For what better way to rule than to split a soul in two, to turn it against itself? To maintain his illusion, the Demiurge does not act alone. He governs through the Archons, his lieutenants, governors of realms, masters of deception. The word Archon means ruler, but in the Gnostic context, it denotes more than just a political function. Archons are spiritual parasites, psychological forces, ideological systems. They are the sentinels of the matrix. Each Archon represents a facet of distortion, greed, fear, shame, pride, lust, control. Together, they shape not just the external world, but the internal world of the human mind. They are the voices that whisper, "You are only flesh. There is no truth beyond what you see. Obey, submit, consume, compete." They are the engineers of false consciousness, masters of distraction and division. In a classic Gnostic myth, the Archons assist the Demiurge in the creation of humanity. They mold the body from clay, but they cannot give it life. Only when Sophia secretly breathes her light into the form does the human soul awaken. This infuriates the Archons. For now, within the body they designed, a divine presence stirs, a threat to their dominion. The soul carries gnosis, the potential to remember its true origin. It is a Trojan horse of light hidden inside their system of darkness. So they conspire. If they cannot extinguish the spark, they can distract it. They cloak it in ignorance, in pleasure, in fear, in doctrine. They create religions that mimic truth, governments that replace justice with power, and economies that reduce spirit to labor and worth to currency. Their goal is not merely oppression, but spiritual sedation. The Archons do not need to destroy you. They only need you to forget. The true genius of the Gnostic myth is that it operates on multiple levels. 1. Cosmic, as a myth of origins, explaining how the world came to be a distortion of divine intention. 2. Political, as a critique of empire, hierarchy, and institutional control, particularly the Roman Imperial Church. 3. Psychological. As a map of inner bondage, showing how we internalize the voices of the archons and mistake them for our own. 4. Spiritual. As a call to awaken, to see that the battle is not out there, but within. The demiurge does not live in some distant throne. He lives in the inherited voices that shame you, the cultural scripts that diminish you, the systems that condition you to look outside for truth, identity, and salvation. And yet, the archons are not omnipotent. They're clever, yes, persistent, relentless, but they are also fragile, for they exist only as long as the lie holds. Their power depends entirely on your perception. The moment you see through the illusion, the moment you remember that you are not what you appear to be, their grip begins to weaken. This is the great Gnostic reversal. You are not a creature of the demiurge. You are older than the world he made. You are a spark of the source, wrapped in illusion, but not born of it. But if we are sparks, then why do we forget? Why is awakening so difficult? Because the archons have woven themselves into every level of reality: social, familial, linguistic, theological. They've even colonized memory and identity. They've constructed an entire matrix of narratives designed to numb the divine question. Who am I? And yet, in moments of silence, despair, or stillness, something pierces through. A memory, a pull, a fracture in the world's coherence. This is Sophia whispering. This is Gnosis knocking. To confront the archons is not to fight them in the conventional sense. They are not enemies to be destroyed, but lies to be unmasked. Their realm is illusion. Their power is borrowed from our forgetfulness. Thus, the Gnostic path does not teach war, it teaches clarity. The first act of liberation is not rebellion, but recognition. It begins when we stop believing the voice that says, "This is all there is." The Gnostic understands that the demiurge rules through inversion. What is divine, he declares corrupt. What is false, he presents as sacred. He flips the moral compass, placing obedience above truth, law above wisdom, conformity above freedom. To obey him is to sleepwalk. To awaken is to reverse the reversal. This is where gnosis becomes more than knowledge. It becomes practice. The ancient Gnostic communities cultivated disciplines that were designed not to appease gods, but to deprogram the soul. Their texts describe inner exercises of reflection, discernment, and purification. These were not external rituals for public display, but intimate journeys of transformation. To walk the Gnostic path is to engage in inner silence, to hear the true voice beneath the noise. Symbolic interpretation, to read the world as allegory, not absolute. Radical honesty, to break through the layers of inherited identity. Contemplation, to anchor oneself beyond sensation and emotion. Discernment, to recognize the whispers of the archons, especially when they wear holy robes. In modern language, this path might resemble a fusion of depth psychology, non-dual spirituality, dream work, and existential inquiry. It is not a single method, but a posture of openness and fire. It asks not that we be good, but that we be awake. Many of the archons live inside us as patterns. Fear of rejection, addiction to certainty, need for approval, resistance to stillness. They don't need to enslave you. They only need you to believe that you're already free. But the Gnostic soul senses the chains, sometimes in quiet despair, sometimes in rebellion, sometimes in the haunting sense that something is missing, something deeper than the life we are living. That ache is a signal, is the call of the higher self, the echo of Sophia's cry. the crack in the demiurge's mask. The Gnostic does not look to heaven for salvation. The Gnostic looks inward, not in narcissism, but in sacred remembrance. Salvation is not a transaction, it is a homecoming. And like all true homecomings, it begins with loss. Loss of illusion, loss of certainty, loss of identity. But on the other side of that loss is freedom. They will throw dust on their heads and say, "This is the end of the world." And in that moment, the one will smile, for the world they speak of was never real. Gnostic reinterpretation. This is the Gnostic apocalypse. Not the end of the world, but the end of illusion. The crumbling of false gods. The unveiling of what has always been. And what of the demiurge? What becomes of the false god when the soul awakens? He fades. He is not slain. He is outgrown. He remains, like the shell of a snake once shed, like a dream we no longer believe, like a voice we no longer obey. His kingdom does not burn, it dissolves. Because the truth is not stronger than illusion. The truth is the only thing that was ever real. In the final analysis, the demiurge and his archons are not monsters to be feared. They're teachers in disguise. By resisting the light, they sharpen it. By opposing the truth, they help reveal it. Their deception drives the soul to seek what cannot be falsified. And what cannot be falsified is this. You're not a child of this world. You are a flame from the unknown light, walking through a dream, learning to wake up. Chapter 7, The Return Journey, Gnosis as Liberation. The Gnostic story, despite its darkness, is not a tale of despair. It is a tale of remembrance. The soul does not fall forever. It forgets, it wanders, it suffers, but always, somewhere within the labyrinth of illusion, a thread remains. A flicker, a voice, a whisper that there is something more than this world of boundaries, systems, masks, and wounds. This whisper is not always welcome. It disrupts, it breaks, but in the Gnostic tradition, it is the first sound of liberation. No one wakes up because the world is peaceful. They wake because it breaks. The systems crack. The identities unravel. The promises of happiness don't deliver. The God of order turns out to be deaf. And in that sacred disillusionment, the soul begins to turn not outward but inward. It remembers that its home is not among thrones, flags, or currencies. Its home is not in conformity or rebellion. Its home is in the silence before all names. This moment, this turning, is not marked by light but by unmaking. The soul stops searching for more to believe and starts asking, what is real? That question, in its rawest form, is the beginning of Gnosis. It does not arise in the temple, but in the wasteland. It comes not from sermons, but from hunger. Hunger for what cannot be bought, taught, or proven. Hunger for the truth that already lives inside. And it is here that the journey begins, not toward some distant heaven, but toward what was never lost. The soul, now stripped of distractions, turns its gaze inward. And what it finds is not clarity, but layers. Stories, personas, wounds passed down like heirlooms, beliefs taken in like air. The soul sees how deeply it has mistaken survival for selfhood, adaptation for authenticity. The archons, it realizes, do not only rule governments. They whisper through thoughts, through shame, through ambition masked as purpose. They tell you what to be. They tell you what not to feel. They define love, success, worthiness, and then they punish you for failing to meet it. To know this is not to be free yet, but it is to stop being asleep. The world becomes transparent, not because it changes, but because you see it. See it for what it is, a stage, a school, a mirror, and a trap. A place where the spark was buried, and where now it must be reclaimed. Reclamation does not mean withdrawal. It means returning through fire. Every belief, every reaction, every inherited pattern must be held up to the light of Gnosis. Not to judge it, but to witness it fully, nakedly, with nothing to protect. It is a painful alchemy. The ego fights, the habits scream, the false gods threaten. But if the soul persists, something begins to loosen. The voice of the spark, once faint, grows clearer. It doesn't speak in commandments. It doesn't shout. It remembers, and it begins to teach you, not in words, but in resonance. You begin to sense what is real, not because it makes sense, but because it rings true in your chest. True stops being something handed down from others. It becomes something that emerges from within. You stop obeying and start aligning. This is Gnosis lived. The soul, once ignited by this inner clarity, no longer moves through the world in the same way. It walks differently. It speaks differently. It listens to silence and to pain, to patterns and dreams. The world has not changed, but its grip has loosened. The archons may still whisper, but their words have lost their spell. Their masks begin to look like masks, and the seeker, no longer desperate to escape the world, begins instead to walk through it, with eyes that see beyond it. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is compassion without bondage, a kind of sacred immunity. The Gnostic soul does not retreat from the material. It simply ceases to be defined by it. Work continues. Love continues. Loss and laughter continue. But none of these are mistaken for ultimate truths. They are threads in a larger tapestry, a tapestry woven not by fate, but by presence. Because when the soul remembers itself, it no longer asks, "What must I do to be worthy?" It knows, "I'm already from the light." The question becomes, how do I live in a world that has forgotten this? There is no formula, only a posture, a way of being that holds stillness in motion, a way of seeing that knows symbols are not things, and things are not real in the ultimate sense. The Gnostic soul carries the divine spark not as a possession, but as a witness, a presence that can recognize itself in the eyes of another, in the breaking of bread, in the tension of injustice, in the hollow throb of beauty. To live this way is not to be perfect. It is to be awake inside imperfection. The archons still persist, but now they are transparent. Their voices grow subtler. Guilt dressed as compassion, ambition dressed as service, shame disguised as humility. But the soul learns to feel the texture of each impulse. It knows when it is moving from essence and when it is moving from programming. It can turn down the noise. It can rest in the knowing that no external system, no doctrine or movement or ideology can contain the truth. Because the truth is not external. It is radiant and wordless, and it lives where silence meets surrender. And yet, this awakening does not isolate. Quite the opposite. It deepens connection, not the clinging of egoic need, but the recognition of shared origin. The Gnostic soul sees others not as characters to change, fix, or save, but as sparks in various stages of remembering. Some are still asleep. Some are cracking open. Some are burning. Some are trying to run from the fire. The Gnostic does not preach. They remain present. Their very being becomes a kind of transmission, a subtle invitation, a living reminder that something greater than the machine exists, that another reality is always possible and already here. The return journey, then, is not toward a destination. It is toward a condition, a way of being where the soul is no longer lost in the architecture of illusion, but moving freely within and through it, guided not by fear, but by the intelligence of the light itself. And this is the liberation that Gnosis offers. Not the removal of suffering, but the end of confusion about what suffering means. Not the escape from the world, but the power to walk in it unenslaved. Not perfection of the ego, but its dissolution into something greater. The soul does not become more. It becomes real, and in that reality, something ancient is restored. Not by force, not by faith, but by remembrance. Chapter 8. Gnosticism and the Modern World. Memory in the Machine. The archons have changed their costumes. No longer thundering sky gods or tyrants wrapped in temple robes. They now hum silently in code, blink in pixels, whisper through curated content, and seduce through seamless interfaces. The modern world is not the opposite of the ancient one. It is its evolution. And in this new empire of signals and screens, the architecture of illusion has reached unprecedented precision. But the pattern is the same. The Gnostics once spoke of rulers who controlled the material world, governing not just through laws and armies, but through deception, distorting perception, limiting knowledge, severing the soul from its divine source. These rulers were not just literal. They were metaphysical forces that shaped reality through false belief, fear, and forgetfulness. Today, we call them algorithms, ideologies, brands, narratives, platforms. And like the archons of old, they do not merely lie. They define the real, or at least they pretend to. They tell us what matters. They define beauty, success, intelligence, worth. They automate desire. They engineer outrage. They monetize loneliness. And we carry them in our pockets, cradle them to sleep, let them guide our thoughts before we've even had a chance to listen to ourselves. This is not a conspiracy. It is a condition. The demiurge no longer proclaims, "I am God," from a mountain. He speaks softly through trending audio, personalized ads, and the quiet dread of falling behind. His goal is no longer to enslave the body. It is to colonize attention, because attention is now the most sacred and stolen resource on earth. The Gnostic would not be surprised. To them, this world was always a simulation layered over truth, a system built to extract energy from the soul while distracting it from its origin. What would surprise them, perhaps, is how willingly we've internalized the prison. We do not fight it. We update it. We polish it. We compete to thrive inside it. And yet, just like in the Gnostic myths, something breaks through. A glitch in the feed, a moment of disconnection, a sudden silence, unbearable and sacred. A question that won't leave you alone. Is this all there is? That moment is ancient. That question is the spark. And even in this world of simulation, something remembers. The machines do not need to be evil. Technology itself is not demonic. But when used without awareness, it becomes a perfect tool for the archons. Not because it kills the soul, but because it distracts it just enough to keep it asleep. The Gnostic path, then, becomes more urgent than ever, not as a rejection of modernity, but as a guide through it. Because Gnosis is not nostalgia. It is not a wish to return to the past. It is a way of seeing that cuts through the present. It asks not for isolation, but for inner clarity amid noise. To walk the Gnostic path today is to remember the light not in the silence of a desert monastery, but in the middle of the timeline. To scroll without being hypnotized. To consume without being consumed. To use the machine without becoming it. What does that look like? It looks like awareness that is not reactive. It looks like asking, who benefits from this thought I'm being fed? What identity am I being sold? What part of me is being pacified? And what part is being forgotten? It looks like presence in a world of performance. It means recognizing that even authenticity can be commodified. Even rebellion can be algorithmically rewarded. Even our desire for truth can be fed back to us in addictive patterns that mimic the real while keeping us forever one step away. And so the journey becomes not a rejection of technology, but a deeper discernment. The screen is not the enemy. The false self behind the screen is. The archons don't care what you believe as long as you stay fragmented. They don't care what you say as long as it never touches the silence within. They don't care if you awaken, so long as you never stay awake. But you can, not by escaping the world, but by becoming lucid within it. This is the modern Gnostic's task, to remember that your soul was never made to fit in a profile, a brand, a role, or an ideology. You are not data. You are not an echo. You are the voice behind the echo, the flame beneath the fog. And when you remember, even for a moment, the system trembles, not because it fears your power, but because it fears your clarity. You can no longer be manipulated once you remember what you are. Not truly, not fully. And that remembering is not a moment. It is a practice. The power of Gnosis is not just that it wakes you up. It's that once you are awake, you can never unknow what you have seen. Even in moments of weakness, confusion, or exhaustion, something in you has already crossed a threshold. It may fall silent, but it does not vanish. That is the danger you pose to the archons of the machine. Not your politics, not your piety, but your awareness. You see it for what it is, not a malevolent monster, but a kind of mirage. A world built on suggestion and reinforcement, where meaning is manufactured and then marketed back to you. The machine wants you to forget that you ever had your own voice. And yet, there it is, subtle, steady, enduring. Beneath every scroll, behind every click, a presence untouched. This is where the Gnostic sensibility becomes revolutionary, not through rebellion, but through remembrance. True resistance in the modern world is not always loud. It's not about viral critique or performative detachment. It's the quiet clarity of a soul that refuses to forget its origin. To carry Gnosis in an algorithmic world is to walk with a hidden flame. You may wear the mask, play the game, engage the culture, but you are no longer owned by it. Your freedom is not contingent on approval. Your truth is not determined by what trends. Your value is not up for measurement. You remember, and this remembrance isn't merely intellectual. It is embodied. It shows up in your gaze, your presence, your refusal to react, your capacity to pause, to withhold judgment, to resist the seduction of instant gratification or synthetic belonging. It is the soul not rushing. It is the soul not needing to be seen in order to feel real. It is the soul that knows it already belongs, not to the system, but to the source. Gnosticism, in this time, becomes less of a theology and more of a spiritual technology, a living response to life inside the machine. Its myths were never meant to remain in ancient caves or buried scrolls. They were designed to speak across time, to name the inner architecture of captivity in every age. And today, the prison is digital. The demiurge doesn't need temples. He lives in operating systems. He feeds not on blood, but on bandwidth. He rules not through commandments, but through endless choice that leads nowhere. He wants you to feel free, because feeling free is easier to control than being free. The archons? They smile now. They're optimized, but their spell still breaks the same way. Not through force, but through lucid presence. The modern Gnostic begins to see everything as symbolic interface. Every app, every scroll, every offer of identity is not good or bad. It is a test. It asks the soul, do you still remember? Will you trade the real for the fast, the true for the approved, the inner for the reflected? And you can say no. That is the radical act now. To say no not in anger, but in stillness. Not out of superiority, but from recognition. Because you've already seen the lie. You've touched what is real. You carry the kingdom within. And once the kingdom has been remembered, nothing the world offers can truly replace it. But there is more. For the awakened soul, Gnosis is not only a way to survive in a distorted world, it becomes a way to serve it. Not to fix the world, not to convert it, but to become a point of coherence inside it. You walk as a living contradiction, rooted but unbound, awake but gentle, human but radiant with memory. You no longer need to prove or persuade. Your presence becomes a doorway. Others sense it, even if they cannot name it. You're no longer playing the same game. You remembered the rules were always rigged, and you stepped outside, not in body but in being. So now, here in this world of surveillance and stimulus, you become something rare, a soul that cannot be coded, a consciousness that refuses reduction, a flame that flickers not in reaction, but in silent knowing. You do not need to win. You do not need to escape. You only need to remember. And in doing so, you walk the ancient path, through a modern maze, carrying the light of a truth that was never lost, only buried. Chapter 9. The Living Gnosis, Initiation, Embodiment, and the Fire that Remains. Gnosis is not the end of the road. It is the fire at its center. All that came before, the myths, the mirrors, the voices behind the veil, were not the goal, but the gate. To awaken is not to arrive. It is to become responsible for what you now see. And what you now see cannot be unseen. The Gnostic path, once walked in secret gatherings and desert caves, now asks to be walked in the open. In a marketplace, the household, the quiet spaces between obligation and yearning. The archons still linger, but they have grown quieter, their illusions thinner. You've seen through the masks. Now comes the question that matters more than any belief. What will you do with this light? It is not enough to know. Gnosis must descend into the body, take root in behavior, in choices, in the rhythms of daily life. Not as dogma, not as display, but as a hidden flame, an interior certainty that changes everything. This is where initiation begins, not in ritual, but in presence. The ancient Gnostics taught that real initiation happens when the soul no longer seeks knowledge as acquisition, but lives it as integration. When the inner and outer are no longer strangers. When the world is not denied, but neither is it obeyed. When truth becomes the atmosphere you move through, without force, without fear. You do not become perfect. You become transparent. And through that transparency, the light moves. This is the mystery of embodiment, that the divine spark, hidden for so long beneath the architecture of illusion, now moves through the body, through breath and gesture, voice and gaze. Your presence becomes your offering, not to convert, not to prove, but simply to reveal. Others sense it, even if they do not understand. The Gnostic does not need to announce. The light is self-evident when it is lived. This is not about being more spiritual. It is about being more real. The more you remember, the simpler you become. The more you remember, the quieter you get. The more you remember, the more you begin to feel everything, not as noise, but as signal. Every moment becomes a symbol, every interaction a kind of initiation. You begin to see the sacred everywhere. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. The veil has thinned. The voice has grown clearer. The fire now moves on its own. And yet, embodiment is not static. Gnosis is not a state you reach. It is a movement that unfolds. Sometimes it blazes. Sometimes it flickers. There are days when the light burns your illusions with clarity. Other days, it disappears into shadow. But even in forgetting, something remains. The fire is patient. The light does not punish. It waits. The work is not to cling to insight. It is to become available to it. This means letting go of the spiritual performance, of needing to be awakened all the time, of trying to feel aligned or ascended, or whatever the language of modern illusion demands. Gnosis is not interested in your image. It is interested in your honesty. Can you stay with your own silence? Can you sit in your own rawness? Can you let the fire refine you without needing to explain it to anyone? That is embodiment, and that is the mark of one who has been initiated, not by others, but by the mystery itself. The world does not need more beliefs. It needs more people who have become what they know. This is the final gift and burden of Gnosis. That truth, once revealed, demands not loyalty, but transformation. The awakened soul can no longer participate in the world in the same unconscious way. And yet, paradoxically, the awakened soul must also return to the world, to its mess, its hunger, its beauty. To carry the light is not to escape. It is to return as a carrier of memory into the very place where memory has been lost. And this is the essence of Gnostic embodiment. Not to transcend life, but to walk inside it without being owned by it. Not to dominate illusion, but to see through it so clearly that it no longer holds sway. Not to rise above the world, but to infuse it quietly with the flame of the real. There is no final form, no settled arrival. The Gnostic does not ascend and disappear into some distant heaven. Instead, they become a kind of living paradox, one foot in form, one in the formless, one hand touching matter, the other resting in mystery. And in this balance, they become useful. They can listen to suffering without drowning in it. They can walk among the sleepers without judging them. They can speak without needing to convince. Their presence becomes an atmosphere, a space in which others might also begin to remember. This is the return of Sophia, not as doctrine, but as gesture, as kindness without condition, clarity without cruelty, and wisdom without pride. And so, the fire remains, not a spectacle, but as stillness, not as a fixed light, but as something alive, breathing, shaping, expanding, and contracting like a lung of the cosmos. You carry it. You carry it into routine, into relationship, into silence. You carry it through heartbreak, through beauty, through stillness. And perhaps no one sees, perhaps no one knows, but that is the mystery. The true Gnostic carries the flame for those who do not yet know they are cold. Not to be a savior, but simply to be a signal, a reminder that the kingdom is not coming. It is already here, and always has been. To embody Gnosis is not to say, I am enlightened. It is to say, I remember. And in that memory, to become a bridge between forgetting and knowing, between form and source, between the aching heart and the truth that was never gone. There is no more need for grand declarations. No more need for symbols or titles or battles of belief. You're no longer looking for the light. You are walking as it. And even when it dims, even when it flickers, it is still yours because it was never given to you. It was always what you were. That is the fire that remains. Chapter 10, The Gnostic Invitation, a kingdom of the present moment. The kingdom does not arrive. It is uncovered. It does not descend from clouds, nor rise from cataclysm. It is not summoned by belief or earned through suffering. It is not locked behind prophecy or secret knowledge or divine approval. It is here. It is now. It is always. This is the final revelation of Gnosis, that everything we sought was already within, that the struggle, the myth, the fire, the forgetting, all of it led us back to this presence, not as a technique, not as a lifestyle, but as the sacred condition of being awake in the moment that is happening now. The Gnostic does not ascend to another world. The Gnostic learns to see this world rightly. The Gnostic does not escape the system. They see through it, and in seeing through it, they become free within it. The kingdom was never hidden by distance. It was hidden by distraction, by noise, by the endless outward movement of a mind trained to search and fix and prove. But beneath that noise, beneath every desire and every fear, is a stillness that was never absent. And in that stillness is not emptiness, but fullness. The kingdom is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it. This is not metaphor. It is instruction. To see the kingdom, one must stop searching for it as if it were separate. One must stop reaching into the future or the sky or the screen. The only requirement is to be truly present. But this is not easy, because presence requires surrender. It asks us to release the dramas we've used to define ourselves, to give up the compulsive belief that something is missing, to stop waiting for the world to offer a moment perfect enough to be holy, and to realize that this moment is already whole. Gnosis was never about the past. It was about this breath, this heartbeat, this glance of light across the floor. The Gnostic myth was only ever a map of forgetting, and in its unfolding, a guide to remembering. You don't need to leave anything behind. You only need to look again. Look, not with the eyes of judgment or control or ambition, but with the eyes of quiet wonder. The kingdom is not an idea. It is a condition of perception, and when it is seen, truly seen, it reveals that everything is already illuminated, even the dark, even the pain, even the ordinary, because presence does not divide. It includes. The Gnostic invitation, then, is not to become someone new. It is to stop pretending to be someone else, to stop living as if life is elsewhere, to realize that heaven is not later. It is the table in front of you. It is the voice inside you. It is the love you almost missed. It is the breath you're holding. Release it, and the kingdom is here. The invitation has never changed. It is whispered in silence, echoed in loss, woven into the breath between words. It does not demand obedience or spectacle. It only asks that you come back to where you already are, not as an act of will, but as an act of surrender. Let go of the distance you imagined. Let go of the separation you've been taught. Come back to this body, to this moment, to this presence that asks nothing but your availability. This is the kingdom, not a place, but a presence, not a future, but a return to what never left. The archons fall silent here. The demiurge loses his voice. For in the simplicity of presence, nothing false can hold its form. There is no need to transcend, only to truly arrive. The Gnostic who has walked the fire, unmasked the lie, remembered the light, and returned to the world. This one does not float above life. They move through it like a quiet wind, carrying no name but truth, no title but awareness, no proof but their gaze. And in that gaze, others remember too. The world continues. Its noise, its systems, its seductions, they do not end. But something in you no longer answers their call. You're no longer auditioning for belonging. You're no longer seeking to be chosen. You know now that you were never exiled. The exile was always an illusion. The return is not a change of place, but a change of perception. You may speak fewer words now, or more, but differently. You may be drawn to silence, to nature, to breath, to the small things, the sound of water, the rhythm of footsteps, the space between thoughts. These are not distractions. These are portals, doorways to the ever-unfolding kingdom within. And you realize the Gnostic path was never about escaping the world. It was about recovering the vision to see it as it truly is, layered, symbolic, sacred. Every moment, an opportunity to return. Every gesture, a chance to love without clinging. every breath, a reminder that the mystery lives within you and has always lived you. You do not need more answers. You need more stillness. You do not need more light. You need fewer veils. The fire still burns, and now it burns through you, not with the hunger of seeking, but with the peace of remembering. So walk gently, walk awake, let the world be what it is, and let your presence speak what no words ever could. If you felt the truth in these words, then the invitation is already alive in you. You don't need to believe. You don't need to achieve. You only need to remember. And in remembering, return. And if you enjoyed this content, comment below and tell us where you're from. Share it with someone you love and subscribe to the channel. Every day, we post new videos to feed the soul.